Human beings appeared on the earth some 2 million years ago. Man first depended on natural vegetation for food. Later, he learned to hunt. His next step was to use fire, then to grow plants. Thus, agriculture started. With time, animals were introduced for ploughing. Also, irrigation became common. These developments led to higher production of food. The natural instinct was to store the surplus for lean periods. During early stages, earthen vessels and bins were used for storage. These are still in use in our villages. Baskets plastered with mud are common in Assam and other areas. But such storage techniques are not adequate. They do not save the grain from insects, fungi, and bacteria. During the last 400 years, human population increased fast. Various developments took place in agriculture. Use of fertilizers and pesticides started. The surplus produced had to be stored in a better way. Large godowns, silos, were constructed. This is the Food Corporation of India's storage complex at Narayana Vihar. It has 16 silos in 2 rows of 8 each. Here we can see one such row. The whole complex can store 21,300 metric tons of wheat. The grain may be stored for as long as 2 years. Establishment of large godowns is not enough. Food stored in these godowns has to be protected. Pesticides provide this protection. But pesticides are toxic to plants, animals, and human beings. They need to be handled with great care. Unscrupulous farmers even mix pesticide with the grain. Thus, the poison is passed on to food ready for consumption. Some of the pesticides commonly misused are persistent. That is, they do not degrade in nature easily. Thus, they remain active for very long periods of time. For example, DDT and BHC can persist in the environment for as long as 20 years. Pesticides are formulated to kill pests and thus save the crop. But wrong use of pesticides causes great damage. When malathion instead of endosulfan is sprayed on mustard crop, it will kill even the beneficial ladybird beetle. Growth in industrial activity, energy production, and transport has brought a large number of new substances to the environment. Today we use some 60,000 chemicals and several thousands are added to the list every year. Some of these are discharged with effluents, emission exhausts, and solid wastes. A large number of them are of toxic nature. Such toxic substances affect both flora and fauna. Here we can see the effect of sulfur dioxide, one of the important industrial pollutants, on leaves. Other atmospheric pollutants are deposited on forage plants. These may be swallowed by grazing animals. For example, fluoride particles released from brick kilns accumulate and cause lameness and loss of teeth. Similarly, particles emitted from petrol contain lead. Thermal power plants emit silica and other harmful particles. Rapid industrialization has added to the problem. Lung and skin diseases, headaches, and lacrimation are only some of the ill effects. If the toxic substances settle on water bodies, they contaminate water. When the contaminated water is used for drinking, the toxins reach the person. Here we see the legs of a child struck with fluorosis. To contaminate water anywhere is to threaten the purity of water everywhere. Such is the cycle of nature. So, by now we have realized that our environment receives various types of toxic substances. These come with stack emissions, effluents, solid wastes, and through agriculture. From there, these enter the human body directly with food or drinking water. Sometimes the toxic substances reach us due to misuse. A gift of fresh fruit must be properly washed before enjoying it, for it may be a health hazard because of spraying. Farmers usually violate the rule that no spraying should be done a week before harvest. Grapes are the ones most likely to be sprayed. Studies have shown that they contain a high residue of several pesticides. The chemical daminoside, used as a growth regulator, may be there on apples. Citrus fruits also contain toxic residues. Quite often, food items are adulterated. Chilies, turmeric powder, black pepper, and other spices are common examples. Prolonged consumption of pulses adulterated with kesri dal causes latherism, which leads to spastic paralysis of the lower limbs. Mustard oil adulterated with argamon oil causes pitting edema, which may finally lead to cardiac arrest. It is a common sight to find sweetmeats, jalebis, laddus, candies, toffees, and other food items brightly colored. People buy them without thinking of what they contain. Colors are used to attract buyers. Most of these are cheap and harmful. They contain toxic compounds which can cause various health problems. It is not only those toxic substances which are present in food or drinking water that enter the human body. There are other hidden channels. If the soil is contaminated with a persistent pesticide, the pesticide will not degrade easily, and so it will remain in the soil for a long time. Suppose 1 kilogram soil contains 1 gram of DDT. Plants may grow in the soil. This means the soil has 1000 ppm DDT, because 1 ppm DDT means that in 1 million units of soil there is 1 unit of DDT. Normally, the roots absorb only water and nutrients from the soil, but with the contamination, the persistent pesticide is also absorbed. By the time of harvest, the concentration of DDT in different parts of the plant will be much higher than that in the soil. Now, some parts of the crop may be consumed by man, while others by cattle. If the consumers continue to depend on the contaminated crop, after some time their body will contain more DDT than the plants. If the cattle is milk yielding, DDT will come out with the milk and will reach human consumers. If the meat of the same animal is also consumed, further quantity of DDT will reach man. So, the higher the position of the consumer in the food pyramid, the more it accumulates DDT. Similar is the case with other pollutants, which stay in nature undegraded for a long time. These grow in concentration from one step to the next in the food chain. This process is called biological magnification. This happens in all types of food chains. Now let us see how biological magnification takes place in an aquatic food chain. Again, take DDT as an example. Suppose an aquatic ecosystem has been contaminated, DDT reaches it through water falling into it. River water may contain 1 part DDT in 10,000 million parts water. The microscopic plants present in water absorb DDT and accumulate it in their body. Invertebrate water animals consume these plants. The invertebrates accumulate more DDT. Small fishes eat the invertebrates and thus receive even more of it. Larger fishes and birds preying on small fishes accumulate further higher concentrations. If man consumes these fishes, he will also accumulate DDT in high concentrations. Birds preying on contaminated fish have been found to contain as much as 10 ppm of DDT. All this is due to biological magnification at each step of the food chain. In Japan, Minamata became notorious because of biological magnification of mercury compounds. These were discharged in the bay by a factory. Minamata is the birthplace of Japan's nitrogen fixation industry. Effluents from the industries poisoned the fishes in the bay. When the people living in the area ate the fishes, mercury was deposited in their bodies. A large number of them died. Human beings are at the top of the food pyramid. They run a great risk of being poisoned as a result of biological magnification. What is the remedy? We can control pollutants and toxic material in effluents through the effluent treatment process. Air pollutants such as harmful gases need to be controlled by air pollution control techniques. To avoid lead poisoning, lead content of petrol must be reduced. Battery-powered transport is another alternative. Solid wastes must be disposed in a scientific and systematic manner. They can be burnt to generate power. One such power plant is at Timarpur in Delhi. It uses 300 tons of garbage to produce 3.75 megawatts of power. The use of substandard colors and additives is a crime. To control food adulteration, laws can be made more strict. But what about pesticides? We have to use these chemicals to protect crops and stored food grains. At present, there is no other economical means available as a substitute to pesticides. Selection is applied while manufacturing and using pesticides. For example, those pesticides which are not easily degradable are not to be used. These survive for a long duration and are biologically magnified. Similarly, pesticides which are not target-specific are rejected. They can affect other organisms, including human beings. This is the reason why pesticides such as DDT, BHC, aldrin and dieldrin are banned in a large number of countries. But the tragedy is that in most of the poor and developing nations, these pesticides are still in use. For example, in India, about 85,000 tons of pesticides are used every year. Out of this, DDT and BHC alone account for about 49,000 tons. The figures become even more alarming when we look at the global consumption of these. 77% of the DDT produced in the world is consumed in India. 95% of the BHC produced in the world is consumed by us. It is no surprise that most of the pesticides misused by Indian farmers are highly toxic. The Central Insecticide Board has fixed the tolerance levels of only 31 out of 131 approved pesticides. But there is a ray of hope. Besides chemical pesticides, there is another way to control some important crop pests. This is through biological control. In this method, natural enemies like insect parasitoids, predators, bacteria, virus and nematodes are multiplied on a mass scale and then released in the field against the target insect. Here we can see the helpful ladybird beetle feeding on aphids which destroy the mustard crop. Similarly, the cotton ball worm which destroys cotton balls can be controlled by Colonus black burney which eats the eggs of the worm. Biological control is a method which is not harmful to human health or to other organisms. But for such methods to become popular, a high degree of social awareness is needed. Farmers of poor countries are mostly illiterate. They do not handle pesticides with due care. Every year, because of pesticide poisoning, human tragedies occur in developing countries. Like our fruit, our vegetables too are no longer safe. There is a high concentration of several pesticides in vegetable samples from the Delhi area. Many farmers spray methylparathion on cauliflower to give it an extra white appearance. It is expected that other food items also contain high concentrations of pesticides. The body fat of Delhi residents contains as much as 26 ppm DDT. This is about 20 times the safe limit. DDT is a chlorinated hydrocarbon and it has affinity for fatty tissues. As milk contains a high percentage of fat, it will also contain a heavy concentration of such compounds. Even mother's milk is not spared. It has been found that mother's milk in Delhi has up to 40 ppm DDT. The average concentration is 1.6 ppm, which in itself is high. We do not know how many babies are thus being slowly poisoned. All this is due to biological magnification of pesticides. Let us examine another case which came to notice in Karnataka. Here in Shimoga and Chikmagalur districts, about 300 people have suffered. It all started in 1975 in farm labourers working on terraced paddy fields. The landlords stopped serving a rice meal as part of the daily wages, and so the labourers were driven to eat such animals as frogs and crabs. These were found in the nearby fields, sprayed regularly with pesticides. The pesticides entered the food chain and through biological magnification accumulated in the crabs. When the people of the area ate these crabs, they too were poisoned. The result was a mysterious, crippling attack of arthritis. All this is going on even after 18 years of the event which attracted world attention. Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. It was about an area which was earlier full of birds. Slowly the birds disappeared. Reason? In the area, toxic pesticides were used. These toxic compounds were biologically magnified. The rain washed DDT from the leaves of the sprayed trees onto the soil. From there it entered the earthworms. When the birds ate the worms, they received DDT also. At each step of the food chain, the DDT concentration increased. The birds, which were the last in the food chain, received the highest concentrations. The chlorinated compound damaged the eggshell, so the eggs did not hatch. Slowly, this led to the total elimination of birds from the area. Thus, when spring came, there were no birds to sing. Due to works such as Silent Spring, Persistent pesticides have been banned in most countries, but the poor and developing nations continue to suffer, and with them suffer their future generations.